How are you guys doing? Today is Wednesday, January 6th, 2021. Out here in this quarantine, I'm James Sims. And for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do a special little segment on DeVonta Smith, the starting wide receiver for the Alabama Crimson Tide, who yesterday on January 5th, 2021 was named the first wide receiver to win the Heisman since Desmond Howard in 1991 from Michigan. It's a very big and very prestigious award, as he was able to win the Heisman over names such as Mac Jones, his own quarterback at Alabama, Trevor Lawrence, the elite starting quarterback for Clemson who won the national championship his freshman year, and then Florida's Kyle Trask, who put up a season that rivaled Joe Burrow's Heisman season from last year. But DeVonta Smith was the most impactful player on arguably the most impactful team. So, of course, they had to give it to him. And he was able to win by a steady margin over Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence had the second most votes, or second most points. But Smith beat him out by about 700-ish points, because it looked as though he had this one up in the bag. Standing at slightly 6'1" and weighing 125 pounds, he went on to lead the FBS in receptions with 105, 1,641 receptions and receiving touchdowns. He had 20 receiving touchdowns on the season, and let's not forget this is a season in which Alabama has played one less game. They're currently 12-0, and ever since DeVonta Smith kind of took reign there at the wide receiver position, he has helped the Crimson Tide win game after game. In Alabama's first game on September 26th at Mizzou, he finished with 89 yards on 8 receptions. That was his first game. His second game versus 13th ranked Texas A&M, he'd finished with 63 yards and 6 receptions and a touchdown. In week 4 at Ole Miss, he'd finish with 13 receptions for 164 yards and a touchdown. He also finished with 14 carries and his only rushing touchdown of the season. On October 17th for week 4, they were able to be third-ranked UGA, or Georgia. He finished with 11 receptions for 167 yards, the most receiving yards he'd have in a season up until that point. And he finished with 2 touchdowns, the first time he had 2 touchdowns in a game. And with this, Alabama would jump up to 4-0. For their 5th game of the season, they would face off against unranked Tennessee at Tennessee, where DeVonta Smith would finish with 73 yards on 7 receptions. His his first 200-yard game this season would come at Mississippi State, where at home they would face off against Mississippi State, beating them 4-0. DeVonta Smith would finish with 11 receptions for 203 yards, his first 200-yard outing of the season, like I just said. His longest reception was 53 yards, and he finished with 4 touchdowns on the day, the most touchdowns that he'd had in the season up until then. Following the 6th win of the season, they had a bit of a break, and when he didn't play from Halloween until November 21st, and in that game they would host Kentucky and beat Kentucky 63-3. He would finish with 9 receptions for 144 yards and 2 touchdowns. This would be the 8th touchdown he had in a 4-game span. And then on the 28th, the next week, they ended up beating 22nd ranked Auburn 42-13. He finished with 7 receptions for 171 yards and 2 touchdowns. Once again, the 3rd game in a row in which he had multiple touchdowns, and at this point, that would be 10 touchdowns within a 5-game span, which is pretty incredible when you consider everything that he's done. And then following that game, on December 5th, they went to LSU, and in that game, DeVonta Smith finished with the most receiving yards he finished with all season. He had 8 receptions for 231 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then going into their final SEC game of the season at Arkansas, they would beat them 52-3 to finish the season undefeated at 10-0. And in this game, DeVonta Smith would finish with 3 receptions for 22 yards. And then just going into the SEC championship game, he was still one of the best wide receivers that the NFL had ever seen, but he was still kind of working to get there. On December 19th, in the SEC championship game against 7th-ranked Florida, he'd finished with 15 receptions for 184 yards and 2 touchdowns. And just continuing to show why he's one of the best in the world. And then going to the college football semifinal, because the college football final hasn't been played yet. In their win against 4th-ranked Notre Dame, DeVonta Smith would finish with 7 receptions for 130 yards and then 3 touchdowns on the game. Once again, another monster performance where, of course, like with 3 touchdowns is no easy, it's no light accomplishment. DeVonta Smith is able to do so against some of the best defenses in the league, especially doing so against the SEC and then Notre Dame. It kind of shows why, after all these years, why there's been a wide receiver that won the Heisman in 30 years, but DeVonta Smith is able to do so. And I think he carries this talent and he carries this elite ability with him into this draft that makes him such an amazing pick that he could be able to change one franchise with just him being there. My one critique for DeVonta Smith is that he's really skinny, and considering all the other wide receivers that have come out of Alabama, namely, even Calvin Ridley he was skinny, but he was a bit bigger than him. They had Julio Jones, Amari Cooper. They've had a lot of big wide receivers come out of Alabama. It's just weird to see DeVonta Smith, who's not as big, but he's still very dynamic. He's very fast. He's very shifty. And let's not forget, he had the game-winning touchdown that Tua threw to him to help Alabama win the championship game in 2017. So it's like he's already a national champ, and he has everything going for him. The only thing that he was missing going into yesterday was a Heisman Trophy, and now going into today, he now has it. Congratulations to DeVonta Smith, the elite wide receiver for the Alabama Crimson Tide out of Louisiana. And I imagine I'm just going to wait until his birthday to do his elite profile, but congratulations to him for winning the Heisman Trophy for the 2020 college football season, the college football season that was plagued with quarantine and a lot of uncertainty, in which no team knew where or when their next game would be. But Alabama was able to cruise through this season, and he became Alabama's third Heisman Trophy winner, and he was the fourth wide receiver ever to win the Heisman Trophy. And additionally, in this season, he was able to win the Paul Hornung Award, which goes to the best wide receiver. He was the Associated Press College Football Player of the Year, the first wide receiver to win Player of the Year since they made the award. It's not an old award. He was a unanimous All-American for the season, and he was the SEC Offensive Player of the Year as well as being first team All-SEC for the second year in a row. And with that said, I want to thank you once again for listening to all 8 minutes of this piece. Today is Wednesday, January 6th, 2021, out here in this quarantine. And as these headlines and as these stories develop, I'm going to cover them, of course, as they can, as quickly as I can. I hope all is well. I want to congratulate DeVonta Smith on yet again for such an amazing season. And I imagine his best days are ahead of him. But with that said, I hope all is well. I will catch you tomorrow regarding today's games. And I want to thank you for listening once again to my piece. And peace out. I'll catch you tomorrow.